Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at a figure everyone thinks they know, a name that's, practically a household word in American history.
George Washington Carver.
Exactly. But the thing is, when you dig into the source material, the popular image just falls apart.
It's the ultimate case of folklore simplifying a truly radical figure.
Yeah.
You ask anyone at all, who Carver was, and you'll get the same answer 99% of the time.
The Peanut Man.
The Peanut Man. And while that's not, totally wrong, that one little label does a massive disservice. It completely overshadows a lifetime of work that was about systemic agricultural reform.
And organic farming, way before it was a buzzword.
Decades before.
Yeah.
And he was navigating this brutal intersection of race and science and just extreme poverty in the post-Reconstruction South. It's a much bigger story.
It is. I mean, the man was literally dubbed a Black Leonardo by Time magazine in 1941. That's a huge title.
A Black Leonardo. And somehow that reputation gets whittled down to a jar of peanut butter.
Which he didn't even invent.
Which he did not invent. We will absolutely get to that.
So that's our mission for this deep dive. We are going to push past the peanut mythology. We've been digging into the sources on his unbelievable journey. I mean, from being born enslaved to his pioneering academic work at Iowa State, his incredibly influential but also, well, often very conflicted tenure at Tuskegee.
Oh, deeply conflicted.
And we want to get to the true core of what he was doing, which wasn't just inventing things for the sake of it. It was this idea of chemurgy.
Chemurgy. It's such a key term. It's the application of chemistry to solve huge, endemic, socioeconomic problems. He wasn't just making recipes.
He was trying to fix a broken system.
The sources really force you to appreciate the scale of the obstacles. I mean, everything he did, his entire framework for innovation, was tied to sustainability and to racial empowerment.
He had to navigate just intense racial polarization, constant administrative battles, all while doing world-class research.
His story is so much more dramatic and, frankly, more interesting than just discovering 100 uses for a sweet potato.
So, if you're ready to see how one incredibly determined person really did transform the American South, let's unpack the life of George Washington Carver.
Let's do it.
So, to really understand Carver's journey, you have to start at the absolute bottom. I mean, the literal bottom of the American social ladder.
You do. He was born into slavery in Diamond Grove, Missouri.
And even that very first fact, his birth date, it's shrouded in the fog of that era.
Completely. He never knew his exact birth date. He sort of guessed it was around January 1st, 1864.
And that timing is so critical.
It's everything. Because Missouri doesn't abolish slavery until January 1865. So he was born right in the tail end of the Civil War, but still born under the full weight of chattel slavery.
His owners were Moses and Susan Carver. They had purchased his parents, Mary and Giles.
Right, but his father, Giles, died in an accident before George was even born, so he never knew his father at all.
And then when he's just an infant, his life is shattered by this act of wartime chaos.
It's a harrowing story. The sources detail it really clearly. When George was just a baby, maybe a week old, he, his sister, and his mother Mary were all kidnapped.
Just stolen in the middle of the night.
By night raiders from Arkansas. And they were taken and sold, likely in Kentucky. This wasn't some abstract historical event. This was a violent, traumatic separation from his mother at the very start of his life.
Moses Carver, his owner, actually negotiated for his return.
He did. He hired a man named John Bentley to find them. Bentley found baby George, but, and this is the tragedy of it, his mother Mary was never seen again.
Just gone.
Just vanished into the chaos of the war. So Moses Carver paid Bentley for George's return, and after abolition, he and his wife Susan continued to raise George and his older brother James.
And it seems like within that context, they treated them with a degree of care.
They did, and this is a crucial point. They encouraged his intellectual curiosity. And Susan Carver taught him the basics of reading and writing. That was the spark. That was the indispensable foundation for everything that came after.
But that little bubble of protection, it couldn't last. As soon as he wanted a formal education, he hit the wall of Jim Crow.
A hard wall. The public school in Diamond Grove excluded black children. Period.
So what does he do? At an age when most kids are just, playing in the yard, he makes this life-altering decision.
An incredible decision. He leaves the only home he's ever known, the Carver farm, and walks 10 miles south to Neosho.
Just to go to a school for black children.
The hunger for education was that strong. And it was there, in Neosho, that he had this pivotal encounter with a woman named Mariah Watkins.
And she gives him something that becomes really his life's mission statement.
She does. The story goes that he introduced himself as Carver's George, still identifying himself by his former owner.
Wow.
And she immediately corrected him. She said, "Your name is George Carver." And then she gave him this charge, this mandate.
You must learn all you can, then go back out into the world and give your learning back to the people.
That's it. And that wasn't just advice. That was an order. It framed his entire career. It was about communal uplift, not personal gain.
That idea, give your learning back, you see it pop up again and again, especially in his work at Tuskegee.
It's the thread that connects everything. But he still had a long way to go. He kept traveling, moving through Kansas, trying to get his education.
And it's during this time in Kansas that a funny little detail about his name comes up.
Right, the famous W.
The ubiquitous W in George W. Carver. Where did it come from?
It's actually a really mundane story. He was in high school in Minneapolis, Kansas, and there was another George Carver in town. Their mail was getting mixed up.
A classic administrative problem.
So to fix it, he just fined. He randomly picked the initial W and started signing his name George W. Carver.
No grand meaning behind it at all.
None. But later, when he becomes famous, people would ask him, does the W stand for Washington? Trying to create this grand historical link.
And what would he say?
He'd just grin and say, why not? It's such a perfect example of his pragmatism. He just solved a problem and let the legend grow around it.
That pragmatism was essential because his path was it was a gauntlet of institutional racism.
Absolutely. The sources talk about his application to Highland University in Kansas. He applied by mail. He was accepted.
So he thinks he's in.
He thinks he's in. He travels all the way there, shows up on campus, and the university officials see that he's black and refuse him admission on the spot.
Devastating.
Just heartbreaking. But it didn't stop him. I mean, this is the thing about Carver. He was relentless.
So instead of giving up, he does something even more incredible.
He travels further west, all the way to Ness County, Kansas, and he homesteads a claim.
He literally becomes a pioneer on the frontier.
For 18 months, he lives off the land. He plows 17 acres, plants rice, corn, fruit trees. He builds a small conservatory for his plants and maintains a geological collection. He's basically running his own one-man agricultural experiment station before he even has a degree.
He was a natural scientist?
Completely innate. And that talent is what finally pointed him in the right direction academically.
He eventually ends up at Simpson College in Iowa.
Right, but initially, he enrolls to study art and piano.
Which again shows you the Black Leonardo side of him. The breadth of his interests was huge.
Huge. But it was his art teacher, a woman named Etta Budd, who saw his real gift. She noticed his exceptional talent for painting plants and flowers with incredible detail and accuracy.
And she's the one who pushed him toward botany?
She told him his deep connection to the organic world would be better served by studying botany at a top agricultural school. And she pointed him toward Iowa State Agricultural College.
And that was the pivot. That was the moment his life's path really solidified.
It was. In 1891, he enrolls at Iowa State. And get this, he becomes the university's very first black student.
That's a monumental step. This isn't just a new school. It's entry into a high-level, cutting-edge scientific world.
And he excels. He graduates in 1894, and his bachelor's thesis was titled Plants as Modified by Man. So you can see, even then, he's focused on that interplay between humans and the environment.
His work was so good that his professors basically refused to let him leave.
They insisted he stay for a master's degree. Professors like Joseph Budd and Louis Pamel, who were top in their fields, saw his genius.
So for the next 2 years, he's deep in research.
Deep in it, at the Iowa Agricultural and Home Economics Experiment Station. And he's specializing in plant pathology and mycology.
So the study of plant diseases and fungi.
Exactly. This isn't just, general farming. This is highly specialized microscopic work. And it's this work that earns him national recognition as a serious botanist. He gets his MSc in 1896.
And we can't just gloss over this. He didn't just graduate from Iowa State. He became its first ever African-American faculty member.
An enormous achievement for that era. It confirms his status not just as a student, but as an academic peer, a pioneer.
So before we move on to the next major chapter of his life, Tuskegee, we have to address the title he's most often associated with.
Dr. Carver.
Right. Was he actually a doctor?
The sources are very clear on this. Although he was called doctor for most of his career, he never actually received an official earned doctorate.
He even called it a misnomer himself.
He did. He said it was a title given to him by others Likely because, his scientific knowledge was so profound, people just assumed he must have the terminal degree.
He did receive honorary degrees later in life, though.
Yes, from places like Simpson College and Selma University. But it's an important distinction. His authority, his brilliance, it came from his research and his teaching, not from a specific title on a piece of paper.
So that brings us to 1896 and the definitive second chapter of his life, a 47-year commitment that starts with an invitation.
An invitation from the most powerful and influential black man in America at the time, Booker T. Washington.
Washington was the president of the Tuskegee Institute, and he was on a mission.
A mission to staff his faculty with the absolute best, most highly trained black professionals he could find. And Carver, fresh off his incredible success at Iowa State, was at the top of that list.
So Washington makes him an offer.
A very compelling offer. He invites him to come south and head the agriculture department at Tuskegee. And he offers him a package that was pretty generous for the time.
An above-average salary, which was a big deal.
A huge deal. And he offered him 2 private rooms for his personal use.
And those little details, the salary and the rooms, they might seem small, but they immediately became a source of tension.
Instant friction. You have to remember the context of early Tuskegee. It was Spartan. Most unmarried faculty had to share rooms.
So here comes this highly educated guy from the north.
From a predominantly white institution, Iowa State.
And he gets special treatment.
Exactly. Some of the other faculty resented it. They saw him as this Westerner who was getting concessions they weren't. So there was a degree of suspicion and maybe some jealousy right from the start.
And the job itself was incredibly demanding. It wasn't just teaching.
Oh, not at all. He was expected to build a whole program from the ground up. He had to teach students about crop rotation and self-sufficiency.
Initiate his own scientific research into new crop uses, which became his chemurgy work.
And this is the part that caused all the problems. He had to manage the agricultural experiment station farms.
And the key part of that was generating revenue for the Institute.
That was the rub. The farms had to be profitable. And this is where you see this huge philosophical clash between 2 giants.
Booker T. Washington versus George Washington Carver.
You have Washington, the champion of the industrial education model. He demanded practical, visible, and most importantly, financially reproducible results.
He needed the numbers to add up.
He needed the ledger to balance. And then you have Carver, who was a pure scientist. He was driven by intellectual curiosity and the pursuit of utility, not by profit margins.
So a genius researcher, but
a genuinely poor administrator. The sources make this abundantly clear. He was inspiring in the classroom and brilliant in the lab, but when it came to managing a business, it was a disaster.
He clashed with the other faculty.
Constantly. Especially with the people who were supposed to be helping him run the farms, like George Ruff and Bridgeforth. Carver was often disorganized, he wasn't great at delegating, and his mind was always on his experiments, not on the farm's balance sheet.
And this conflict comes to a head in a really dramatic way in 1904.
It does. An internal committee at Tuskegee investigates the farm's operations, and they find that Carver's reports on poultry yields.
Which was a key source of income.
Exactly. They find the numbers were significantly exaggerated, inflated.
And this leads to a direct confrontation with Booker T. Washington.
A very painful one. For a man like Carver, who valued honesty so highly, being accused of deception was a huge ethical blow.
So what was his response?
He immediately offered his resignation. He wrote to Washington that the deception was more than I can bear.
But Washington didn't accept it.
No, because Washington, for all his frustration, understood Carver's value. His intellectual prestige was worth more to Tuskegee than his administrative failures cost it. But it set a precedent.
Carver learned he had a trump card.
He did. He threatened to resign multiple times after that whenever he was unhappy with his teaching load or some administrative reorganization. It was his way of pushing back against the system.
So that's the big question. If Washington knew he was such a bad manager, why did he keep him? Why did he protect him?
Because he needed him. He needed the scientific credibility that only Carver could provide. There's this amazing assessment that Washington wrote about Carver in 1911. It's one of the most honest and layered critiques you'll ever read.
What did he say?
He starts by praising him. He calls Carver one of the most thoroughly scientific men of the Negro race with whom I'm acquainted. He absolutely recognized the brilliance. But then he lays out the limitations with brutal honesty. He says, when it comes to the organization of classes, you are wanting inability. When it comes to the matter of practical farm managing, which will secure definite practical financial results, you are wanting, again, inability.
Wow. So he saw him as this brilliant but a fundamentally impractical asset.
Exactly. Irreplaceable for the prestige and the high-level science, but totally unsuited for the day-to-day business of the Institute. It was a tension they just had to live with.
The classic conflict, the genius who can't handle the paperwork versus the leader who needs measurable results.
And that pressure, thankfully for Carver's legacy, eased up a lot after Booker T. Washington died in 1915.
His successor was more hands-off.
Much more. He made far fewer administrative demands on Carver, and this is what really freed him up. From 1915 to about 1923, Carver was able to just dive deep into his research, focusing almost exclusively on those new uses for peanuts, sweet potatoes, soybeans.
But before we get to the science itself, we have to talk about how he got that science out to the people in those early, difficult years.
The Jessup wagon.
The Jessup wagon. It's such a brilliant, practical idea.
It's a fantastic symbol of early agricultural extension work. It was a mobile classroom, basically a demonstration lab on wheels.
And it was designed by Carver himself.
Designed by Carver and funded by a philanthropist named Morris Ketchum Jessup. The whole point was to bypass the barriers. Most of the farmers he needed to reach couldn't read his bulletins or travel to Tuskegee.
So he brought Tuskegee to them.
He brought the university to the fields. The wagon was loaded up with soil samples, crop exhibits, demonstration tools. He pioneered the idea of taking the lab directly to the people who needed the knowledge most.
So let's turn to the heart of that knowledge, because his real mission, his true agricultural revolution, wasn't about finding a new recipe for candy.
Not at all. It was about saving the entire economic and ecological foundation of the American South.
The core problem he was tackling was immense.
It was. He called it the exhaustive system for cultivation. You have to remember what happened after emancipation. Black farmers were promised 40 acres and a mule, but that was revoked.
So they were forced into sharecropping.
Locked into these agreements where the only guaranteed cash crop was cotton. And they were forced to plant it year after year after year on the same piece of land.
And that had two devastating effects.
First, the economic one. Total dependence on one volatile market kept them trapped in a cycle of debt and poverty.
And second, the ecological one.
Which was even worse in the long run. Cotton is a very heavy feeder. It just strips the soil of its essential nutrients, especially nitrogen.
And these poor farmers, they couldn't afford modern manufactured fertilizers.
No way. So the soil just became depleted, contaminated, lifeless, unproductive. Carver saw this ecological collapse as the absolute root of the economic poverty plaguing the South.
So he steps in 100 years ago and essentially becomes a leader of the modern organic and environmental movement.
He is absolutely a pioneer of environmentalism. And his solution was just so elegant because it blended ecology and economics perfectly.
Systematic crop rotation.
That was the core of it. He urged farmers to alternate their cotton crops with nitrogen-fixing legumes.
Specifically peanuts, cowpeas, and sweet potatoes.
Right. And the science behind this is what makes it so genius. Can we just pause on that for a second?
Yeah, let's break down nitrogen fixation.
Okay, so think of the nitrogen in the soil like a battery. Planting cotton over and over just drains that battery completely.
Until the soil is dead.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But legumes, like peanuts, have this amazing symbiotic relationship with bacteria that live in little nodules on their roots.
And these bacteria do something amazing.
They take inert nitrogen gas, which is all around us in the air, and they fix it. They convert it into a chemical form, nitrates, ammonia, that plants can actually absorb and use as food.
So planting peanuts is literally like plugging the soil back in to recharge.
That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
You're naturally recharging the soil battery, making it fertile and ready for a successful cotton crop the next year, all without buying a single bag of store-bought fertilizer.
It solves poverty and soil depletion at the same time.
It's an incredibly elegant solution. You restore the land, and you give the farmer two other potential cash crops that they can eat or sell.
And he didn't stop there. He was also a huge advocate for organic fertilizers.
Decades ahead of his time. He taught poor farmers how to use materials that were free and readily available: swamp muck, compost, peat moss. He was all about recycling nutrients back into the system.
Even things like advocating for woodland preservation to protect topsoil.
And telling farmers to feed their hogs acorns because they act as natural pesticides and, they're free feed. It was all about creating a closed-loop, sustainable system for the small farmer.
And his main way of sharing all this knowledge wasn't through stuffy academic journals.
No, it was through his practical bulletins. This was his real gift to the world. The sources say he published 44 of them over 4 decades.
Written for the average person.
In simple, accessible language. They covered everything. 6 bulletins on sweet potatoes, 5 on cotton, others on preserving meats, growing alfalfa, They were his true commercial success.
The most famous, of course, was from 1916. How to Grow the Peanut and 105 Ways of Preparing It for Human Consumption.
Right. But the goal of those 105 ways wasn't just about food. It was about market creation. And that brings us back to chemurgy.
That key term, agricultural chemistry for industrial goals.
Exactly. Carver had a very practical problem. If he convinced a farmer to grow a huge surplus of peanuts to fix the soil, what was that farmer supposed to do with all those peanuts?
If there's no market for them, they'll just go back to planting cotton.
Precisely. So Carver saw it as his job to use his laboratory to invent a market, to find hundreds of non-food, industrial, and consumer uses for these crops to create demand.
He wasn't inventing a product. He was inventing the possibility of a market for the crop itself.
That's the perfect way to put it. Look at his work with sweet potatoes. The sources list 73 different dyes he derived from them, 17 wood fillers, 14 candies, 5 library pastes, 4 flours.
These weren't necessarily things he was trying to sell himself.
No, they were demonstrations of utility. He was showing the world, look what you can do with this humble sweet potato. You can use it to color your clothes, fix your wall, make glue for your books.
Which explains his very sparse patent record.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
For all the hundreds of applications he promoted, Carver only ever received 3 patents. 1 for cosmetics, 2 for paints and stains.
And none of them were commercially successful.
Not a single one. He never launched a successful company around any of his inventions.
And what's really fascinating for historians is that he wasn't a meticulous record keeper like, say, Thomas Edison.
Not at all. He didn't keep detailed lab notebooks with all his formulas written down. He wasn't trying to create proprietary industrial secrets.
The sources say he was more of a curator and a synthesizer.
He was. He and his assistants would collect recipes and applications from everywhere. Cookbooks, magazines, other farm bulletins. His goal was dissemination, not necessarily origination. He wanted to find and share the most appropriate technology for the small farmer.
Which, of course, brings us to the biggest myth of them all.
Let's bust it once and for all.
Did George Washington Carver invent peanut butter?
Absolutely. Unequivocally not. It is a complete myth.
Historical records show it goes way back.
Way back. The Aztecs were making a version of it in the 15th century. But more to the point, a U.S. patent for the manufacturing of modern peanut butter was awarded in 1884.
12 years before Carver even set foot in Tuskegee.
To a Canadian pharmacist named Marcellus Gilmore Edson, Carver's 1916 bulletin simply listed peanut butter as one of the many known uses for the crop.
So his real genius wasn't in creating a snack food. It was in identifying the peanut as a vital ecological tool.
And then tirelessly promoting hundreds of uses. Some his, some compiled to guarantee that the farmers who grew it had an economic lifeline. That was the revolution.
So despite all the administrative fights and the lack of commercial patents, Carver becomes a household name in the early 1920s.
Almost overnight.
Yeah.
And it's all because of one dramatic, highly unusual appearance in Washington, D.C.
His congressional testimony in 1921.
Right. So at the time, American peanut farmers were getting hammered by cheap imports, mostly from China. They were lobbying Congress hard for a protective tariff.
And the National Peanut Growers Association had a secret weapon.
They invited Carver, based on his exhaustive research, to come testify before the powerful House Ways and Means Committee.
Now, in the deeply segregated America of 1921, having a black man appear before Congress as an expert witness, that was a huge deal.
Almost unheard of. And he was met with immediate skepticism and, frankly, racism. Southern congressmen initially mocked him.
But Carver was ready.
He was more than ready. He brought a whole traveling exhibition with him. Samples of peanut milk, peanut flour, industrial dyes, stains, all sorts of things.
He didn't just tell them, he showed them.
And the sheer quality and scientific depth of his presentation just blew them away. The committee, which started out hostile, kept extending his time because they were so captivated by the economic potential he was laying out.
He basically turned a stuffy committee hearing into a one-man science fair.
He did, and it worked. The tariff, the Ford-Niebuhr tariff, was passed in 1922, and that successful testimony made Carver a bona fide national celebrity, respected across the racial divide as a true American genius.
And it seems like he handled that celebrity pretty well in his later decades.
He did. He traveled a lot, promoting Tuskegee, promoting his crops, and promoting racial harmony. His academic output slowed down a bit, but he shifted to popular media.
He wrote a syndicated newspaper column, right?
Professor Carver's Advice. He became one of the country's first real media scientists, bringing his knowledge directly to the public.
And his fame gave him access to the highest levels of power. He met 3 different presidents:
Theodore Roosevelt, Calvin Coolidge, and Franklin D. Roosevelt. But even more interesting was his friendship with the titan of industry, Henry Ford.
An unlikely friendship.
You'd think so, but Ford was deeply impressed by Carver's focus on self-sufficiency and creating products from renewable resources. It fit with his own vision.
And their friendship was genuine.
Very. There's a great story that when Carver's health was failing in his later years, Ford personally paid to have an elevator installed in Carver's dormitory at Tuskegee so the old man wouldn't have to climb the stairs.
Wow, that's a huge gesture of respect.
It shows that Carver's character and his utility had transcended the racial codes of the time.
And his influence went beyond the U.S. He even corresponded with Mahatma Gandhi.
That's right. He advised Gandhi on nutrition and sustainable agriculture to help improve Gandhi's failing health. Just think about that. A man born into slavery in Missouri is advising the leader of the Indian independence movement.
It's incredible, and it all culminates in that 1941 Time magazine article calling him a Black Leonardo.
The perfect title, recognizing his immense talent across so many different fields.
Let's talk a little about his personal life, because the sources describe him as being pretty frail his whole life.
He was. He suffered badly from whooping cough as a child and had recurrent respiratory problems. Doctors didn't expect him to live past his 20s. The fact that he lived to be nearly 80 was a testament to his resilience.
And that childhood illness might explain his distinctive voice.
Yes, he had a very high-pitched voice that startled people who met him for the first time. Historians think it was likely due to damaged vocal cords from all those severe childhood infections.
He never married.
He never married, though he did have a courtship for about 3 years with a teacher named Sarah L. Hunt. Biographers have suggested his private life was complex and that he may have been bisexual, but the intense social and religious pressures of the time would have forced him to keep that deeply private.
He did find a very close friendship and partnership later in life, though.
With Austin W. Curtis Jr., a young Cornell graduate who became his research assistant and protege.
And their bond was clearly very deep.
It was. Carver saw him as a kind of surrogate son and his intellectual heir. When Carver died, he bequeathed the royalties from his authorized biography to Curtis.
And through all of this, his deep Christian faith was a constant.
It was central to everything. He was adamant that his faith and his science were completely intertwined. He believed it was his faith in Jesus that allowed him to understand the mysteries of the natural world.
He even compiled his own ethical code.
His 8 cardinal virtues. It was his definition of a true lady or a gentleman, and it was all about humility and service. Cleanliness, inside and out. Bravery, honesty, and generosity, making sure that after you take your share, you help others get theirs.
A philosophy he clearly lived by, especially when it came to money.
He was famously frugal, and in 1938, near the end of his life, he established the George Washington Carver Foundation to make sure his research would continue after he was gone.
And he donated his entire life savings to it.
Every penny. When he died on January 5th, 1943, his savings totaled $60,000.
Which today is over $1.3 million.
All of it went to the foundation and the Carver Museum.
He died from complications after a bad fall down a flight of stairs. And the sources give us this last poignant image of him.
He was sitting up in bed painting a Christmas card at the time. He was buried next to Booker T. Washington, and the inscription on his grave just perfectly summarizes his entire life's ethic.
He could have added fortune to fame, but caring for neither, he found happiness and honor in being helpful to the world.
The clearest possible statement of his priorities: service over self, utility over wealth.
Carver's death in 1943 wasn't the end of his story. It really marked the beginning of his formal national recognition.
Immediately, there was a movement led by a Missouri senator you might have heard of, Harry S. Truman, to create a national monument in his honor.
And this was in the middle of World War II, when all non-war spending was being scrutinized.
Right. But Truman argued that honoring Carver wasn't a distraction. He said it would be a boost to national morale, that it would unleash and release the energies of roughly 15,000 Negro people for full support of our war effort.
And the bill passed unanimously.
Unanimously in both houses. On July 14, 1943, FDR dedicated the George Washington Carver National Monument in Missouri.
And this was a landmark moment in American history.
A huge landmark. It was the first national monument ever dedicated to an African American, and the first to honor anyone other than a U.S. president. It shows the unique towering stature he had achieved.
And the honors just kept coming over the years.
Commemorative stamps in 48 and 98, the Carver Washington half-dollar coin in the 50s.
And recognition from his peers and professional organizations.
The Spingarn Medal from the NAACP, the Roosevelt Medal for Agriculture, induction into the National Inventors Hall of Fame. The list goes on and on.
Let's talk about his specific, enduring impact on the Black diaspora and on STEAM fields.
He's a foundational figure for Black empowerment through science. He used his knowledge as a tool for self-sufficiency. In an era that actively suppressed Black intellectual achievement, his success at the absolute highest levels was a powerful inspiration.
He showed what was possible.
He demonstrated that excellence could overcome even the most antagonistic environments. And because his farming strategies helped both Black and white farmers, his work actually became a bridge.
Creating a common ground based on economic survival.
A common, necessity-healthy soil that transcended Jim Crow.
And his legacy in the scientific fields he pioneered is secure.
Absolutely. The American Chemical Society designated his lab a National Historic Chemical Landmark. The USDA calls him the Father of Chemergy.
And that title, Father of Chemergy, really is the most accurate summary of his life's work.
It is. His legacy isn't a specific product you can buy in a store. It's a revolutionary, sustainable approach to agriculture that continues to inspire environmental scientists today. He was doing holistic ecosystem management before anyone had a name for it.
It's just incredible when you step back and look at the whole arc. From being burned enslaved, stolen as an infant,
fighting just for the right to go to school,
to commanding the respect of presidents, industrialists, the entire global scientific community. This deep dive has really cemented that his true contribution was so much bigger than the Peanut Man myth.
It really was. We've seen the contradictions. The brilliant botanist who was a terrible administrator, the man whose legacy isn't in patents or wealth.
Only 3 patents, none of them made any money.
Right. His legacy is in the accessible, practical knowledge in those bulletins. Knowledge that fundamentally improved the land and the lives of thousands of the poorest farmers in America.
His greatest innovation wasn't in a test tube. It was societal. It was taking high-level science mycology, botany, chemurgy, and translating it into survival tools for the most disenfranchised people.
Which brings us right back to that quote on his grave. He could have added fortune to fame, but caring for neither, he found happiness and honor in being helpful to the world.
And in our world today, where scientific breakthroughs are so often immediately tied to monetization, to venture capital, to personal wealth, what does Carver's choice teach us?
A very profound question.
What does his focus on public good and sustainable utility over personal fortune tell us about how we should measure scientific success today? That's a question for all of us, especially current and future researchers.
Indeed. It forces you to ask. Is the most valuable research the kind that generates massive private wealth, or the kind that fundamentally helps people survive and thrive on the very ground beneath their feet?
A question for you, our listener, to explore on your own. Thank you for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.
Welcome to The Debate. Today, we are examining the profound and often contradictory legacy of George Washington Carver. For 47 years at the Tuskegee Institute, Carver served as a titan of agricultural science, eventually hailed by Time magazine in 1941 as a Black Leonardo. His influence reached far, far beyond the Black community, making him a truly iconic figure in American history.
That recognition is really a testament to the extraordinary impact he had. I mean, especially considering the highly polarized era in which he worked. His celebrity was genuinely national.
Absolutely. The issue we have to resolve, though, it goes to the very core of his professional identity. Was George Washington Carver primarily a foundational scientific innovator whose, rigorous research transformed American agriculture? Or was he principally an expert agricultural educator and humanitarian symbol whose most profound legacy rests on his extension work and advocacy? I maintain the evidence strongly supports his identity as a rigorous scientist and innovator.
And I come at the material from a slightly different angle. I believe his lasting contribution, his profound influence, rests primarily on his pragmatic role as an expert educator and a powerful humanitarian symbol. His ultimate goal was empowerment through usable knowledge, not proprietary scientific discovery.
Well, we have to begin with his credentials. Carver was a deeply trained scientist. Before he even got to Tuskegee, he secured a Master of Science degree from Iowa State in 1896, where he became the university's first African-American faculty member. His research focus there was, well, it was elite: plant pathology and mycology. These were not the studies of a simple farmer. This was the work of a leading botanist, earning him national scientific respect long before he ever began writing a recipe bulletin.
His credentials are absolutely impressive, but the direction of his career pivoted pretty quickly. His work at Tuskegee was necessarily driven by social reality. His primary intervention wasn't in theoretical science, but an applied methodology designed to alleviate the immediate desperate condition of poor, often sharecropping farmers. His core recommendation, systematic crop rotation with nitrogen-restoring legumes like peanuts and cowpeas, was a critical, scientifically based solution. Yes, but it was packaged and delivered as a practical survival mechanism. It was applied science, really, driven by a humanitarian imperative.
But that application was predicated on technical sophistication, which is where the innovator in him really shines through. The peak of his national fame came not from distributing simple advice, but from a highly technical presentation at the 1921 congressional hearings, the ones regarding the Fordney-McCumber tariff. He wasn't there to talk about recipes. He was presenting complex evidence to support a tariff on imported peanuts.
And what was the nature of that evidence?
It was his work in chemurgy.
Right. And for our listeners, that term refers to the branch of applied chemistry concerned with developing new industrial products from agricultural crops, so turning farm output into marketable goods like fuel, plastics, or paints.
Exactly. At that hearing, Carver unveiled extensive exhibits and samples, demonstrating products like peanut milk and industrial dyes derived from crops. This was a sophisticated, high-level appeal rooted in chemical innovation and industrial possibility, aimed at the highest halls of power in Washington, D.C. This confirms he was thinking like a scientist, focused on technical breakthroughs for industrial use.
I agree that the chemurgy demonstrations were impressive tools of advocacy, but I question their ultimate place in his legacy as an innovator. I mean, if his goal was truly industrial innovation, why did the source material note that he, quote, left no records of formulae or procedures for making his products and did not keep a laboratory notebook? True scientific innovation, especially that geared toward industrialization and reproducible commercial success, it requires rigorous, documented methodology. The absence of that documentation suggests his priority was the demonstration of possibility, the educational advocacy goal, not the detailed, reproducible process required for a scientific breakthrough.
I see why you think that, but let's look at his commitment to formal intellectual property. The material confirms he secured 3 patents between 1925 and 1927, 1 for cosmetics, 2 for paints and stains. Securing formal patents is, well, it's the definitive action of a scientific innovator committed to formalizing intellectual property and protecting original discovery. He also established the George Washington Carver Foundation in 1938 with his own money, specifically to continue agricultural research, indicating his long-term goal was institutionalizing scientific inquiry, not just humanitarian outreach.
That's a strong point on the patents, but the critical question is the impact. I would argue that those 3 relatively obscure patents are just dwarfed by the cultural and educational impact of his 44 practical bulletins for farmers. These weren't patent applications. They were guides on food preservation, simple recipes, and advice on surviving soil depletion with very limited means. These publications were the primary output of his career, and they directly served his mission of practical uplift.
But the service was enabled by the science. Let's return to the nature of his inventions. Carver's intent was never commercial profit for himself. His humanitarian ethos informed his science. He devoted nearly $60,000 to the Carver Foundation, a tremendous sum for the time, reinforcing this focus on service. His research into creating replacements for expensive commercial goods like starches and molasses from sweet potatoes directly addressed the small farmer's need for independence, foreshadowing modern concepts of appropriate technology. He was applying high science to address immediate social inequality.
While his intent was noble, the results speak volumes about his primary impact as an educator, not an innovator. The material clearly states that, quote, not a great deal has been done to utilize Dr. Carver's discoveries commercially. The popular myth that his work drastically increased U.S. peanut production after the boll weevil crisis, which devastated cotton farming across the South, was largely propagated by popular media, not commercial output. We have to remember the context here. The boll weevil fundamentally threatened the survival of millions of Southern farmers.
And the scientific solution he presented saved them.
The solution he taught saved them. His greatest achievement was convincing impoverished farmers through simple, digestible, repeatable instructions delivered via his extension work, most famously the Jessup wagon. This wagon was essentially a mobile classroom, taking simplified lab knowledge directly to the field. This was a triumph of pedagogy, communication, and social engineering, not proprietary invention. We can't ignore that he is still mistakenly credited with inventing peanut butter, which was patented decades earlier. This persistent public confusion confirms his reputation rests on myth and symbol, not documented technical breakthroughs.
I understand the importance of the outreach, but the pedagogical triumph relied entirely on the rigor of the underlying science, the mycology and plant pathology he mastered at Iowa State. If the science was flawed, the bulletins would have been worthless. Let's pivot now to his professional life at Tuskegee. If Carver was such a devoted scientific rigorist, why was his tenure defined by so much administrative friction?
That friction is a key indicator of his true priority. His professional life was fraught with administrative conflict, which raises questions about his suitability for a rigorous, structured research environment. We have records showing Booker T. Washington was quite explicit, stating that Carver was, quote, wanting an ability when it came to the organization of classes and securing practical financial results from the experiment station farms. He threatened resignation multiple times when given assignments he disliked. This institutional difficulty suggests a brilliant scientist struggling to function in a high-demand academic research role that required organizational and administrative skills he just lacked.
I'm not convinced that administrative difficulty equates to a lack of scientific commitment. Washington's comments have to be taken in context. Washington needed immediate, tangible, fundable results for the institution's wealthy northern benefactors. Carver's desire for dedicated, long-term scientific inquiry often clashed with Tuskegee's urgent need for practical outreach and financial returns.
That's framing the situation as external pressure, not internal deficiency.
Precisely. Washington simultaneously praised Carver as one of the most thoroughly scientific men of the Negro race with whom I am acquainted and lauded his original research. This tells us that conflict was organizational, not intellectual. It wasn't that Carver wasn't rigorous, it was that his research needs were not being met. The source material notes Washington even refused requests for basic research supplies for Carver's exclusive use. This structural impediment forced Carver's focus on teaching and those voluminous bulletins. He was diverted from pure lab work because the institutional demands of the moment required it.
That's a fascinating reinterpretation of the evidence, suggesting he was constrained from his true scientific potential. However, the constraints themselves defined his eventual legacy. The necessity of outreach, that massive shift toward the practical bulletin, is what made him famous and what defined his most impactful years. Look at the period after Washington died in 1915. Carver did gain more autonomy, concentrating on experimenting with new crop uses from 1915 to 1923, which allowed him to conduct the research that led to that 1921 congressional hearing. Yet even during this freer period, his success remained in translating concepts and demonstrating possibilities, rather than delivering mass-marketable, documented scientific breakthroughs that industry could immediately adopt.
But those concepts were foundational. Let's look at his long-term influence through the lens of environmentalism. Carver wasn't just fixing a crop problem. He was solving a deep ecological crisis. He was a leader in promoting environmental stewardship that foreshadowed the modern organic movement in the South.
That is undeniable, but again, the science served the service.
His approach was fundamentally ecological and scientific. He pioneered the use of organic fertilizers like swamp muck and compost, and pushed for specific woodland preservation techniques to improve topsoil quality. His system of alternating nitrogen-rich crops wasn't just diversification advice, it was a scientifically designed, holistic effort to organically transform Alabama's failing cotton-depleted soil over decades. This reveals a long-term, high-level scientific perspective on environmental management that goes far beyond mere teaching methods.
He was using chemistry and botany to solve systemic environmental failure.
That's a compelling argument for the depth of his scientific thinking. But the humanitarian goal remained the driver. The purpose of restoring the soil and ensuring sustainable crop production was simple: to guarantee that poor farmers could achieve economic independence and survive the exploitative system of sharecropping. The environmental benefit was a means to achieve the humanitarian end. And furthermore, his legacy is inextricably linked to his role as a symbol for racial harmony and Black empowerment. His wide recognition, his friendships with industrial leaders like Henry Ford, and his counsel to presidents demonstrated his success as an advocate and a moral force in a divided nation. His self-definition is perfectly summarized by his epitaph, which states he, quote, found happiness and honor in being helpful to the world. That inscription prioritizes selfless service over the personal fortune or academic acclaim that groundbreaking scientific commercialization might have brought.
The fact remains, his ability to be helpful to the world was entirely enabled by an elite scientific education and a rigorous scientific mindset. George Washington Carver was a trained, disciplined botanist who utilized the foundational sciences, mycology, plant pathology, and early chemurgy, to devise comprehensive, systematic solutions for the South's agricultural crisis. His true genius lies in applying high-level academic science to foundational ecological problems like soil depletion and advocating for sustainable alternatives, even if the urgent needs of Tuskegee meant his immediate output emphasized educational outreach over patented consumer products. He was a scientist who strategically chose a public service path.
I continue to interpret his life's direction differently. Carver's enduring legacy is built on his role as an unparalleled educator and a moral symbol. His greatest impact was translating those complex scientific principles into immediately usable, empowering knowledge through his 44 practical bulletins and the physical mobility of the Jessup wagon. This process economically uplifted poor farmers and, through his public acclaim, profoundly challenged racial barriers. His influence was less as a traditional commercial innovator, since his formal patents had no commercial success and he deliberately avoided meticulous lab records, and far more as a powerful, necessary voice for practical sustainability and Black self-determination.
The material clearly demonstrates that Carver spent his life navigating the inherent tension between the pursuit of scientific rigor and the immediate pragmatic demands of humanitarian outreach in the Jim Crow South.
And by examining the details of his career from the cutting-edge botany lab at Iowa State to the administrative struggles at Tuskegee, and particularly his tireless efforts to equip poor farmers with knowledge, listeners can gain a fuller appreciation for the complex, multifaceted demands placed upon one of America's most celebrated figures.